You know something? I drove 9.5 hours to New Orleans, spent 4 days there watching films day in and day out, still dropped numerous reviews while I was there, numerous shorts, even launched a brand new show, and then drove 9.5 hours back and went right back into work mode. And what did I get for all of my troubles? A bunch of comments saying, yeah, cool, but when are you going to talk about the First Omen? What about the First Omen? I want to hear what your thoughts are on the First Omen, not this other stuff. First Omen, man, time's a ticking. Well, I guess there's nothing left to say, but this is all for you, you greedy bastards. All for you. What is going on, guys, and welcome to my review of the newest prequel, The First Omen. And by the way, I'm totally joking in the intro, just in case somebody doesn't understand my sense of humor. I love the fact that you guys are very enthusiastic and want to hear what my thoughts are on a movie that historically I would not have very much faith in. And yeah, history proved correct, because I did not have very much faith in this one at all. So The First Omen is a film that goes back and tells the story of how the Antichrist Damien was conceived. All the events that led up to that original film from the 70s that is a beloved classic and is one of my favorite horror films of all time. And I've been on record numerous times on this channel that I really don't care for horror prequels all that much. I don't even know if I could fill a full hand counting the ones that actually work for me. Too often, they get rid of a lot of the mystique, a lot of the ambiguity that I think adds to the horror of the property. Too often they spend their time answering questions that I was not asking, and most times the answers that they give are not very satisfying and are not nearly as interesting or creepy or as terrifying as what I have come up with in my own head as an audience member. So I just don't really like what they do. I don't like what they bring to a franchise, and there's rare examples when they're able to prove me wrong. And when they announced this film and you started to see some advertisement for it, immediately I went right back to that skepticism and that cynicism and just said, well, what questions were we asking about that First Omen that now decades later we have to talk about? Like, what about the conception of Damien is such a need-to-know detail or a need-to-know story that it's going to add anything to this franchise that, quite honestly, has never really been able to maintain quality past the first film. But then all the early reviews came out, and then a lot of you guys got to check it out and sent a lot of reactions on Twitter and in the DMs and a lot of comments saying, hey man, it's actually pretty damn good. When are you going to check this thing out? And so I started to get pretty interested in it. And so finally, after almost a week of not being able to get time to go and check this thing out, I was able to see it at the latest showing available last night, and I'm here to tell you, while I don't know if I can still fill a full hand, I got one more movie to throw on that list of pretty damn good horror prequels. Starting off with the positives of The First Omen, I really like the approach that they take here about building that eerie and that very unnerving tone, building an atmosphere that fits very much with this franchise, predominantly that first film, and even their approach to the scares, which does not rely so much on traditional Hollywood jump scares. There's a couple, but it's more so about just that uneasy feeling and that building dread that the original film is known for doing so well. You get this nun that comes to this convent, and right away you can tell things are off. There's some behavior, there's some language being given that just kind of sets you on an eerie mood. There's some really nice visuals, even in scenes that aren't necessarily overtly horrific, that just give you the vibe that something odd is happening, that there's something coming down the pipe that would not be a good situation. And there's numerous times in the movie where they just focus on a visual, whether it's a smile or a look on somebody's face or something in the corner of the room, or even a completely pitch black screen where you can barely make out that something is moving without being able to discern what it is. That's that old school approach to horror that I really appreciated. They're not going for the easy low-hanging fruit. They're actually taking the time to utilize the skills of everybody on set behind the camera to build the scares. Also got to give credit where credit is due. This movie fucking goes for it in a couple of spots. I had read some reports that they were really fighting against an NC-17 and maybe even an X rating, that they really had to struggle to get an R rating, and I was always curious what that meant. Is it because of the subject matter? Is it because of the gore? And nope, it's for some other things. Some images that Yeah, I wasn't sure I would ever see on the big screen, but you could check that off the bucket list now. What the fuck? So whether you're somebody that likes to have their scares with built tension or you just like to be shocked with images, they pretty much got everything covered in this one. Nell Tiger-Free does very good in the central performance, and her character is a very easy character for the audience to latch into and to sympathize with and go on this journey with, because she's a very relatable and normal person that is surrounded by anything but. And the story that they chose to tell here, I actually do think adds something to the franchise. And perhaps that's the biggest win of this movie, because that was my biggest concern, is like, what is the point of this? What are you going to tell us or reveal to us or give further context to that is even necessary at this point? And essentially what they do is they explore kind of the potential dangers and some of the dangerous interworkings of big entities, you know, be it corporations, be it churches like the Catholic Church, but it just explores further about what exactly the motivations were, what the end goal was for the group of people that facilitated the birth of Damien and the people that were there throughout his entire lifetime in the first film and the sequels to keep him alive, to have him fulfill his destiny. What exactly did they want? Was it just simply to hail Satan? Was it just to glorify evil? Was it just to create chaos? Or were there more human and selfish motivations for that? And this movie is mostly exploring and giving context to that. And I actually thought it was interesting, and I do think it does reinforce and add to the franchise in a positive way. There's a really good score here as well. It is unique throughout most of the film, but in the moments that it needs to be, it very directly calls back to that phenomenal score of the original film, and it actually gave me chills whenever it really kicked in during a scene in the third act. I was like, yes, this right here is the DNA of the Omen that we all love. And finally, something that I can't say for a whole lot of prequels, but I think they do a pretty good job with here. While I would not encourage you to watch this before watching the original, I mean, I would just question your decisions as a human being while you have not watched the original, and now that we're on the subject, but the movie does frame itself in a way where you could very easily and naturally watch this one, experience the story, and get all the information that they're giving you, and then immediately watch that original film, and everything's going to flow together really nicely. This isn't a prequel where there's so many winks and nods and references and Easter eggs to the movies that it's prequeling that you're gonna miss a lot of the appeal there if you don't experience those films. You don't really have that problem here. So if you are somebody that has never experienced the Omen franchise, and for whatever reason you are adamant about starting with this one and watching the films in now chronological order, they at least execute the film in a way where that's going to be just fine for an experience. Moving on to the mixed, the main one for me is the Omen signature kills, the accidental deaths, the omens themselves. This is something that is a huge piece of this franchise, and horror fans specifically, that's one of the more important ingredients of specifically the first two films, and I guess the remake. And they have some of them here. The movie kicks off like letting you know that this very integral piece of the Omen movies are back. But then in the second half of the film, they kind of forget about it. And I don't know whether it would have been better to maintain it throughout the entire runtime or just have more of them happen in the front half. But they actively tell you that there's this impending doom, there's this danger regarding these characters and this investigation that is going on, and there's very deliberate dialogue given to tell the main character as well as the audience that motherfuckers are gonna die if they try to interfere with what's going on here. Like, shit's just gonna happen out of nowhere, and for a couple of people it does. Just not nearly enough for me. And the ones that we do get are great. They're gnarly, they're different, they're unique. I mean, the Omen franchise in a lot of ways was kind of like the prototype for what Final Destination eventually became, and I wanted more of that. I think modern audiences would want more of that. So I like what we got here. I just wish we would have got more of it. And now moving on to my negatives. The first one I need to just get out of the way, and it is not a negative reflection on this movie. It probably isn't even going to play into my score, but it is something that is worth bringing up. This movie is remarkably similar to Immaculate that we just got a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know what the deal is with that. I don't know if it's just this wild coincidence. I don't know if the same script was adapted by two different people and one of them was made into an Omen prequel and the other one was made into something more original. I really don't know, but I would say it'd be generous to say 60% of the plot of this film is identical to Immaculate. And there's going to be people that prefer Immaculate's approach. There's going to be people that prefer the First Omen's approach. And for me, the only disappointment that comes with that is that I think I would have enjoyed this movie a bit more and been a bit more captivated with what was going on if I didn't experience such a similar movie just a couple of weeks ago. And so that definitely probably affected how much I struggled to get into the movie at first. And on that note, I do think that the first act of the film is pretty slow. You know, it was till they really start to get into the Omen stuff and still things really kick into high gear. I do feel like the movie's kind of run-of-the-mill nun horror stuff. I felt very much about the first act of this film the way that most people seem to feel about the first two acts of Immaculate. So there was a good chunk of this film where I was like, oh man, everybody hyped this up and I'm struggling to get into it. Eventually I did, and eventually I had a really good time with it, but there was at least 30 minutes or so where it wasn't really grabbing me. There's a creative choice in this film to kind of play coy with certain details and to try to have some surprises and reveals by the third act. You know, there's this whole investigation going on throughout the plot of the film where the main character and a priest character knows that there's some situation going on where somebody is being groomed to be the mother of Damien, and it's a matter of finding out who that is. And I just never really felt like they executed the surprise side of that storyline very well because I always knew where they were going to go. And I didn't even watch the marketing to this film, so I have a hard time believing the marketing didn't give it away blatantly for everybody that did. That's another issue in and of itself. But the movie, I feel like, could have just been very upfront about the direction we were going and been just fine. The attempted surprises kind of fell flat for me. One of the main characters of this film, one of the protagonists, is Father Brennan, and the actor Ralph Ineson has a very thick and very deep accent. And for me, there were moments in the film where I really struggled to hear exactly what he was saying. And, you know, that's not something that probably wouldn't be resolved with a rewatch, but I'm in a big theater by myself with no distractions, no other ambient noise, big badass sound system. And there was probably at least 5 lines of dialogue where I was like, huh? The fuck did he say? And my final negative, which ended up being one of my biggest negatives of the film, I'm going to do my best to not talk with any specificity because it does deal with the ending of the film. But they leave certain things open so that they can continue with more prequel storylines. You know, more things that either happen concurrently with the First Omen or things that happen just before the events of the Omen. And that was extremely confusing and baffling of a decision to leave the film off with because without spoiling too much, it leads into the First Omen very nicely. I mean, I was like, yeah, you stuck the landing. Good. This all works together. All the cogs fit together. Good job. And then they add one more scene at the very end of the film to tease that there's more stories to tell. And I don't know what the fuck more stories there are to tell. I mean, to be fair, I guess I didn't even know that this one was necessary and I ended up liking that one, so maybe I should extend a little trust their way, but I just don't know what there is to explore with those dangling plot threads that are going to make sense given that the Omen and the Omen sequels have already happened and this is clearly in canon with them. So you can't really play with the details and the events of those films at all. So that was baffling to me. That was very strange. And as much as I liked the film and was hyped up by the end of it, that was the last note I walked out on and I was kind of like, why? It genuinely felt like they had the movie in the can and then that was like a studio exec's note for like a quick little, you know, weekend reshoot. And it just made no sense to me. It had corporate written all over it and it did not add anything. In fact, it kind of took away from the impact of the end of the film. So overall, guys, I was pleasantly surprised by this one. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think that this is definitely a nice addition to the Omen franchise. And if I was going to pick between this and Immaculate, Immaculate, as much as I liked Immaculate, I do think the First Omen was a little bit better by the end of it. So I'm glad that they executed it in a really good way. Once in a while, it's nice to be proven wrong about horror prequels. And so if you're a fan of the original and you were worried about this one, give it a shot. Just be prepared to have some images burned into that skull of yours, because woohoo, yeah, there's a couple. That's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my playlist of all of my Omen reviews up here for you to check out. I've reviewed every film in the franchise now. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.